This is Coach PDHPE with a Core 2 video. For more Year 12 PDHPE information, you can find it at the website coachpdhpe.com. So it's Core 2, Factors Affecting Performance, and its key idea for how does the acquisition of skill affect performance. And it's the very last dot point for Core 2, which is assessment of skill and performance. Now to do this dot point, well, I think it's far easier if you put yourself in a scenario of being the coach of a high school sporting team and have a bit of a scenario. And the scenario is you've had 50 players sign up for the team and you've got to get the squad down to 15 players. And the actual syllabus point gives you a bit of a guide to how you can actually do that. There are 4 dash points, and it's like almost a bit of a step process of what the coach can do in terms of evaluating who are the best players in that squad. So from that list of 50, you obviously want skilled performers, and that is the first dash point, characteristic of skilled performers. And the syllabus gives you 4 examples: kinesthetic sense, anticipation, consistency, and technique. And I'm going to give you sporting examples, either past or present, who were outstanding examples of each one of those characteristics of a skilled performer. The first is kinesthetic sense, and Jordan, the basketball player, was outstanding in doing this. And what kinesthetic sense means is the ability to be able to adjust your body during the performance of a skill. It's being aware of what is going on around you and being able to adjust accordingly. What Jordan was often able to do was, while he was performing a skill, was move his body in relation to what the defender was doing in front of him. So he could be taking a dunk, for example, and he's able to see where the defender has moved to block his shot, and Jordan is then able to respond to that and move his body accordingly. That is known as kinesthetic sense. The next is anticipation, and Jonathan Thurston is outstanding at this. He plays for the Cowboys, Queensland and Australia, and he is known for being able to anticipate what the defender is about to do. In fact, even before the defender commits. So it's almost like he can read the defender's mind. It's all about anticipating the play as it's about to unfold. The next example is consistency, and it's from Roger Federer. Roger Federer can make backhands regularly without making unforced errors, and he's able to do that because of a variety of factors, but he is consistent time and time again. Occasionally he will make an unforced error when put under pressure, but more often than not he returns the ball consistently more often than his opponent. The final one is technique, and this is demonstrated by Kelly Slater. I don't know a lot about surfing, but my surfing friends tell me that he displays outstanding technique. And the way you explain this is that he makes surfing look easy, when it in fact is far from easy. Whether it's got to do with his body position on the board or his weight distribution, how he moves his hips, etc., or the balance he displays on the board, his overall technique makes surfing look easy. One of the examples the syllabus doesn't mention is mental attitude, but it is certainly a characteristic of a skilled performer. This is all about how the athlete performs under pressure, how they respond when they're feeling fatigued, how they respond to crowd noise and sledging from opponents. And Cameron Smith, the Storm and a Queensland captain, is an excellent example of doing this. He has a high level of mental attitude. The next dash point is objective and subjective performance measures. And one of the things you might want to do as a coach in the scenario I've given you is come up with a set of measures to help test you, to help test the students to see whether they're going to make the cut in your team. So what does objective and subjective mean? Well, objective equals making a judgment based on fact, while subjective means making a judgment based on opinion. So what does that mean in relation to choosing a sporting team? Well, if I'm choosing a basketball team, for example, I might want some objective information, some factual information. One of the key components of basketball is shooting. I might introduce a shooting test. I might get players to take 20 shots from around the free throw line and record the results. And the top 20 players, for example, with the best shooting might get into the next round for my team. That's an example of objective performance measure. The next is subjective. Subjective is when you're basing the decision on the opinion of the coach. Now this in fact is actually sometimes very reliable, particularly when the coach is very experienced, such as a Wayne Bennett in rugby league. It's probably, in Wayne Bennett's case, more reliable than objective measures. It's when the coach just makes a decision based on what is before his eyes. So Wayne Bennett, if he was the coach of this Year 8 or Year 9 OzTag team, he might look at simply get the team to play a trial, and very quickly he would be able to evaluate who were the better players by just watching it. That is called a subjective opinion. The next dash point on this syllabus is validity and reliability of tests. So this is talking about if the coach did decide to implement some fitness or skills tests, are they actually going to be valid and also reliable? Because what you do want is objective results. Fitness tests or sporting tests to pick your team, you want them to be reliable and you want them to be valid. So what does it actually mean? What is a reliable test? That means each time the test is undertaken, it is given under exactly the same conditions and using exactly the same equipment. So for example, let's say you're choosing your basketball team and you decide to implement the beep test. A reliable aspect of the beep test is if it was done on exactly the same way each time you ran the beep test. So the first running of the beep test with 10 students, it was done in a gym. The next day with the next 10 students, it was done outside because the gym was unavailable. That means that test would be unreliable because it was done under different conditions. For the test to be reliable, it must be done under the same conditions each and every time. The same with the shooting test in basketball. Did the students take the test from exactly the same position? Were they put under pressure by some students while they were taking the test? For the shooting test to be reliable, it must be performed under the same conditions each and every time. So, the validity of test. What does it mean for a test to be valid? Well, this refers to how well a test measures the purpose of the test. That sounds a little bit wordy, so what does that actually mean? So if I'm talking about a basketball test again, is the test specific to the sport? Let's say the coach, for example, decides to implement the push-up test as a muscular endurance test. Well, you could ask the question, is that test specific to the sport of basketball? And I think the answer to that is no. There are a lot better fitness tests to implement than the push-up test, for example. So I would actually say that is not a valid test when it comes to basketball. A far more valid test would be the vertical jump test. That is testing how high a student can jump. And that is, as you would know, pretty important in basketball in terms of making rebounds and in terms of doing dunks. So, moving on. This is really important when it comes to reliability and validity of tests. A test can be reliable, but it may not be valid. A test can be valid, but it actually may not be reliable. The aim of your testing is to make it both reliable and valid. The final dash point is personal versus prescribed judging criteria. And this is how it can be best described. Personal is what you have seen as the coach, and prescribed is following a set of criteria. And let me give you some examples from two different sports to explain this. You all would have seen the sport of diving at the Olympics. The diver makes the dive from the board, they land in the water with very little splash, and you go, well, that's a 9.5, that's a 10, that was an outstanding dive. They then put the scores up and you see scores like this, 8.5, 9, 8, 7.5, 9, and you're thinking, how did they come up with that? That looked like an outstanding dive. That's because they're following a set of criteria. And the criteria is broken up into 5 different levels: starting position, approach, takeoff, flight, and entry into the water. Sorry, those bottom 2 were cut off from there. And they're actually looking at those 5 components when they make a judgment on the actual dive. They're not just going by one look at the dive, giving their personal opinion. They're following a set of criteria. The second element to look at is this idea of personal criteria, and that comes up in the sport of boxing. Sorry, I've lost my way there. In boxing, what happens, the judge at the end of each round makes a decision on who landed the most punches in boxing. They don't actually necessarily tap anything when they do it, they're just making a judgment. But what's written in the rules is this: in each round, the fighter who lands more punches is awarded 10 points. Judges, at their discretion, can award a round to a fighter who may have landed fewer punches if they deem that his punches were harder. That means it's purely up to the judge to decide who won that particular round. And that's why boxing is so controversial, because how one judge will interpret the results is completely different from the judge possibly sitting next to them. It's why a lot of people don't actually like the sport of boxing, because it is so unreliable. Both of those examples, both diving and boxing, are examples of subjective appraisal. Now, if you want to make subjective appraisal effective as a coach, it has to be a bit like what the diving judges use. So, for an example, a soccer coach trying to assessing the skill of dribbling, he could make an subjective appraisal just by watching the players in a game to see how they dribbled. But if he wanted to make that more accurate, he could work off a set of something such as a rubric or a criteria that's listed right here. And as he watched the different players perform the skill of dribbling, he could make a more accurate judgment rather than just making a purely subjective on its own by just witnessing players in action. So when picking a team, for it to be effective, it's advisable to use prescribed judging criteria. That's what will make the selection of any sporting team based on skills most effective. The right hand side of the syllabus says develop and evaluate objective and subjective performance measures to appraise performance. And to do that, I think you have to keep in mind the following points. Have a scenario up your sleeve. So, for example, what I talked about right at the start, that you're the coach or selector of a team. To do a performance measure, you're going to run both fitness tests and skill tests. You're going to have examples of both objective and subjective tests, both for skill and fitness tests. You're going to have examples of a prescribed judging criteria and how they're more effective. And your goal in doing all this is to eventually find the skilled performers. Thanks for listening. I suggest you hit the textbooks for more detailed information on this particular dot point. And if you want some more Year 12 information on PDHPE, you can find it at the website.